Hi guys, so I'm joined by Simon. We're going to have a bit of Q&A about finances and financial well-being. So if you haven't had a chance to ask your question yet, do pop it in the chat and we'll be coming to them shortly. But Simon, you mentioned quite a lot about the CAP Money course and just wanted to remind people that we do have a course starting on the 10th of March. And that's going to be held over Zoom, and it's a 3-week course, completely free. I did it just before I went as a student, and it was so helpful. And I can't recommend it highly enough. So I'd really encourage you to look at the website and sign up for that course if you haven't done it before. And it's for anyone, whether you kind of struggle and want help with finances, or whether you just want a little bit more information about what CAP Money does. And on that note, let's watch a short video about CAP to find out a bit more about what they get up to.
Roughly speaking, yeah.
No. Roughly. We know what's going on, but there's very little in there.
You have to keep up with it.
Yeah, definitely you have to keep on top of things.
I think I'm overdrafted.
I know that they take quite a lot of money out of it, they shouldn't.
Every year, over 10,000 people go through the CAP Money course. It's a simple system, it will help you control your money, and it really is important that you get money under control. It's so exciting to see literally thousands of lives transformed by this system. The good news is the CAP Money course will work for you.
Before CAP Money, I am very disorganised with my money. I had wages coming in, bills going out, spends going out, treats on the kids going out, and not knowing where I was at on a regular basis. Very disorganised. Since I've done the CAP Money course, everything makes a little bit more sense. I can budget a lot better. We've got money allocated for the treats for the kids and stuff like that. So everything is a lot easier now.
What I really liked about the CAP system was it really helped me to kind of break things down. So I now have a home improvement fund. I have a fund for holidays. I have a fund for Christmas. I have a fund for birthdays. I have a fund for getting my hair cut. Yeah, so it's really helped me to put things in order, and I know exactly where everything is.
I knew I wasn't in a lot of debt, but nevertheless it was just something I put off. So CAP was fantastic because it meant that I could face up to the reality of what was coming in and what was going out.
Great, really good to have those questions as a little bit of a challenge to yourself as well. So yeah, do sign up for the CAP Money course, 3 weeks, completely free, and you get some great advice and hang out with people talking about finances.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
I really would encourage people, if you haven't done it, it was transformational for me and Katrina. It sounds like it was for you.
Yeah.
You know, even if you think you're doing okay, it's just a brilliant resource for, you know, cut out all that unneeded spending, all those subscription services that you don't need anymore.
I think I might need to do it again on that note.
But no, really helpful in terms of like how you divide your money up into chunks and think what goes where.
Yeah. So. I think it just cuts out that, like, I think there's a lot of shame around talking about money sometimes. I think John Kirby mentioned that, and I think it cuts that out when you're in a group of people that are all happy to share and talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
So we've had some great comments in the chat, so thank you for that. Lots of people who've obviously used CAP or have reached out for help with debt before. So thank you, Paul and Angela, for sharing some of your story. Pete Moon says he did the course 10 years ago and it's made a massive difference. So yeah, thank you so much. Lots of people saying it's a really timely word and something that they really wanted to hear about. So let's start by asking you some questions, Simon.
Okay, then.
So we've had quite a few questions actually about this idea of tithing.
Okay.
So I wonder if you talk a little bit, some people are saying, should they tithe if they're in debt? And some people are talking about, does the tithe have to go to the church or can it go to wider organisations?
That's a lot of questions. Well, first of all, so first we'll say there's a whole chapter in the Peach and Coconut book on tithing, because it's a big question.
Yeah.
But very briefly, if you haven't heard of tithing before, tithing is this idea that you give 1/10 of your gross income. And it was an idea in the Old Testament, so before Jesus, where they lived in really an agricultural environment, and they would give 1/10 of their first fruit. So as they've got the harvest in, they would take the first 1/10 of the harvest and they would give it into the temple. And actually there were arguments about whether there were one tithe or several tithes, whether they gave 10%, or some people reckon they gave 23%, but it was this idea that under the law that you gave the first tenth and then the rest was yours to keep.
Right.
Now, we're not told in the New Testament to tithe. There isn't a command to tithe. But the reality is we now live in an era of grace. So they lived under law. We now live under grace. And the reality is that grace actually always takes you further than law.
Yeah.
So in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, hey, the law says don't commit adultery, but grace says don't even look at a woman lustfully. And the reality is that this era of grace always takes us beyond law. And I love what my friend Owen McManus once said. Somebody came to him and said, you know, is this a law church or a grace church? Should I give 10% or not? And Owen said, we're a grace church. You know, the law said give 10%. You can give 20, 30, 40% and go beyond that.
Yeah.
So I think there is this sense of almost like, you know, that's almost like the ceiling, the floor that we should start from.
Yeah.
If we go like, what does generosity look like? Then I think it looks like actually us giving back to God a tenth of what he's already given to us if you have that idea of stewardship. But actually, I think that the challenge is to go beyond that and go, actually, it's not about giving a tenth. You know, as a rule, it's about going, no, we want to go way beyond that. We want to model generosity that takes us much further than that. I think the question, if you're in debt, should you tithe? Certainly, if you're in the level of debt that you're working with, say, an organisation like CAP, then you won't be allowed to tithe. You know, that's the reality. And I think morally, your first responsibility is to your debtors, is to get your way out of debt. Now, not everyone would agree with that, but that would be my sense of, you know, you've got this issue, sort this issue out, and then get yourself in a place where you can then model that radical generosity, but don't put yourself under an additional pressure of trying to work that out. And I know some people are terrified that God's going to judge them. You know, somehow they're robbing God. I don't think God sees it that way. I think God is a God of grace who wants us to get to a good place.
Yeah.
I do think, you know, when they gave the tithe, it went to the place of their provisions. So it went to, you know, for them the temple. I think for us it would be the church.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge is to go beyond that. So Katrina and I actually give more than 10% to the church in terms of a tithe, but then give to a whole load of other organisations and individuals. To go beyond that. So I think that for me would be the challenge for us.
Yeah. On that note, if you kind of wanted to give to a charity, there's so many amazing organisations. How do you choose which one to give your money to? Have you got any kind of advice for that? A few people have been asking.
I think you can think, you know, what are you particularly passionate about? So Katrina and I give to a number of charities. Like CAP, we sponsor a compassion child. We do a number of things like that.
Yeah.
I think there'd be things that personally impact us, where we go, you know, here's something that we really feel connected with. And probably do it with a few rather than just spread it massively across loads and loads, that you can really focus on those charities or organisations, pray with them, stand with them.
Yeah, that sounds great. Fab. Couple more questions coming in. Someone's asked about what your thoughts are on saving for a pension. So I know John Kirby talked a bit about savings, but what about saving for a pension? What do you think about that?
I think it just makes sense. There's a verse I read, this Proverbs 6, verses 6 to 8, says this: go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food at harvest. And I think there's this sense in our lives that there are seasons of summer and there are seasons of winter. And when we hit a season of winter, then we rely on those times when there were more, you know, when there was a harvest to be had.
Yeah.
And I think there will be seasons in our lives when we have more finance and, you know, when we're working, when we're in employment. And then actually when we retire, we need to rely on what we've built up in those seasons of harvest, those seasons of plenty to get us through what might be a season where there's less finance. So I think biblically, I think God would say, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, the reality is the state pension is a wonderful provision, but it's not enough for most people to live on. So we need to be making that plan for later life. That would be my sense.
I suppose another question that is kind of linked to that idea of saving for later life or preparing for later life. A few people are asking about insurance, particularly life insurance. What would you say to people kind of looking to spend money on that sort of thing?
Yeah. First of all, I'm not an expert on this stuff,
okay? If you could just tell us all the pros and cons.
Which one?
Yes. I think it would be, you know, a sense of what you're going to leave behind for people.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, you know, when our kids were younger, then probably life insurance made sense for us, because if anything happened to us, we'd want to make sure that they were provided for.
Yeah.
You know, we're now at a stage that our kids have grown up, they're doing their own things. You know, I want to be sure if something happened to me that Katrina would be okay, that she would be in a fine place, or if something happened to her, I would be okay. But that's changed now from when we had young kids. You know, it'd be different for you, you know, this season as a single person. You know, you haven't got that sense of dependence, and that may come in the future. But I think it's about being sensible, but not going, crazy. What's responsible? What's,
that's good.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your preach a bit about kind of being more entrepreneurial. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I just have this sense, you know, I've seen a number of people, I won't mention anyone because I haven't got their permission, but we would know a number of people in Kerith who've stepped out of, you know, potentially the security of just a regular paid employment and set up businesses, and some people have set up charities, and I love that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, that we can step out and do some new things. You know, one of my friends who literally started with a mop and a bucket and now has built up a cleaning business, which, you know, is employing, you know, a lot of people. And I just think, I love that entrepreneurial spirit of people stepping out and just doing fresh things. Other people who set up Amazon businesses, and I think God wants to sow that into us as a community. And I would love us to get those people together more, and, you know, that they might bounce off and inspire one another. You know, not that people might live in enormous houses. I love that example of Rick Warren. You know, someone who's made, you know, literally millions of pounds and yet still lives in the same house because he wants to model radical generosity. Yeah. And I think those people who want to earn, you know, money in a way that isn't going to impact the rest of their well-being, I think, you know, it's nice to see that people who become focused on something, it actually impacts, you know, everyone else pays the price for that. I don't think God wants us to live that way. But within the bounds of well-being, actually can generate significant finances to sow into the kingdom and to sow into, you know, all these different things, possibilities. You know, just hearing about Tess and the house, and Renova having the money to buy that house now.
It's amazing,
Lots of that is because of people within Kerith who have been able to give. And that's just such a gift for people to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think people would share your sentiment there. You said about kind of people who are entrepreneurial, sort of supporting each other.
Yeah.
Someone said, you know, how about setting up a mentor program for entrepreneurs? Like, great idea. I think it's like sharing advice, isn't it? And wisdom about that. Yeah, quite a few people are asking, I suppose, about, I mean, you said that finances impact all our well-being, but I think particularly relationships, you can see that. What would you say to someone who maybe had a friend who was going through this? You know, how can we help someone who's going through that situation?
I think, first of all, create a space where you can just talk about it. You know, I think so often in life that's what people need. You think of someone who's grieving and has lost someone. You know, they just need a space where they can talk about the thing that they've lost or the person they've lost. And I think when it comes to this, there can be so much shame and stigma attached to being financially struggling. I think we have to break that and create a place where people can, you know, not share with the whole world, but have a trusted set of people. And so much of the power, particularly of debt, is in that shame. You know, I know people in our community who've been in debt, and you go in the houses and there's literally, you know, piles of envelopes that they haven't opened because they're just too frightened of what they're going to see. I know people in our community who've been crawling around their houses on their hands and knees when someone knocks on the door because they're scared it's the bailiffs. And God doesn't want us to live under that sort of fear. So I think, you know, being honest ourselves with our own struggles. You know, I've talked about how Katrina and I have struggled at points in our lives, and just that openness, not judging anyone, not condemning anyone, and honestly, you know, leading people to that place that can help. And I just believe that anyone, you know, I've seen people with hundreds of thousands of pounds of debt, and God set them free. And I don't think there's any situation which is irredeemable. You know, there's no situation that God can't get people to a place of financial well-being, and that will require hard work and will require honesty and openness and the favour of God and all sorts of stuff, but you can get to that place.
There's lots of people in our community, aren't there, that have been so faithful with that process that, you know, after lockdown we need a celebration for it. Because, you know, there's people that are going debt-free this year even. on the note of relationships still, there's a few questions in the chat about people who are married or are in a couple and have kind of disagreements about finances, maybe about goals or tithing. Do you have any advice for people that are in that situation?
Yep, I think, talk about it again. You know, I think if you're in a relationship where you've got a Christian and a non-Christian who are married, I think you've got to play that, you know, very honestly and openly and transparently. And you might be in a position that actually you can't do the things that you would like to do because that's the situation that you're in. And I think not to allow that to become a stress or a strain in the relationship is really important. I think budgeting, you know, just sitting down and actually consciously making those decisions together about where our money is going to come. I mean, one of the best things Katrina and I did, this is a little tip, we've each got a Monzo account. And every week a small amount goes into each of those Monzo accounts, which is just our money. You don't have to account for that. You can just do whatever with it. And I know a number of couples, I was chatting with a younger couple in Kerith, and that just sorted a load of stuff for them, you know. So one of them can spend money on gaming and one of them can spend money on other stuff, and they're not going, but you've spent it, you know. It's
with
there.
the different interests, like planning for that, I suppose, must help a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, that would be a little thing, but we found that really helpful. In terms of not being down on each other as to what we're spending money on. But I think again, it comes down to talking, and I think that, you know, if you're going to do cap money, I'd encourage you, if you're in a relationship, do it together. That you can make those plans and make those decisions, even if one of you isn't a Christian, to actually form that budget together and then work on that budget together, I think is so key.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for all those questions.
That's
Simon,
brilliant.
I wondered if anyone wanted to find out more about this, is there any kind of, other than cap money, obviously, is there any kind of books or places that you would kind of recommend they look?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you're interested in tithing, I would go to Peach and Coconut, and that would just explain more of our philosophy as a church community. I think for practical advice, I mean, Martin Lewis, the money saving expert stuff.
That's a great website.
He is just genius. I mean, he's a big fan of cap, so that makes me a big fan of him. But he just gives so much practical advice. If you were looking for just straightforward practical advice about life insurance or pensions or mortgages, or that would always be one of the first places I would go. Because I think, you know, they've got no agenda other than to help people. You know, they talk about student finances.
And he's got a great article on student finance.
So I would say Martin Lewis, Money Saving Expert, is a brilliant website, just with, you know, it's not Christian, but just some really practical, solid advice. And then I would say seek out people in our community. You know, there's people in our community who are in the finance industry, in the finance world, or people who are just doing their finances really well. You know, I think of like Mike and Jackie Weber-Gant, just do their, I'm just amazed how they manage stuff. And I think, you know, find one of those people and spend time with them. You know, if you want an entrepreneur, find an entrepreneur. If you're want a budget, you know, talk with those people and pull on the resources of being part of this amazing community. I think would be my advice.
Good advice. Thank you so much. Well, guys, we've come to the end of Kerith Live for today. Next week, we've got Heather Pocock preaching on vocational wellbeing. That's really exciting. And don't forget to check out the website for what's going on this week. We've got things like K-Cruise on Friday, and you can sign up for those courses that we've mentioned today as well. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and see you next Sunday.